Hello everyone and welcome to the Legal Helm, where we explore the evolving intersection of law and technology. I'm your host, Bim Dave, CEO of Helm360. Today's guest is someone I've known for over 2 decades. David Langdon and I first worked together at Elite in London in the early 2000s, and since then, our paths have crossed many times across the legal tech landscape. With 30 years in the industry, David has worked across consulting, implementation, support and sales, spending much of his career vendor side working with firms globally. Today, he leads Blind Spot Consulting, where he helps firms navigate transformation and technology adoption. He is also the author of Beyond the Features, a book that challenges how firms think about legal tech procurement, and he's become a passionate advocate of workspace accessibility, bringing both personal perspective and practical solutions. David, it's a pleasure to have you on the Legal Helm today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Bim. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Yes, indeed. So as I mentioned in the intro, you and I obviously first crossed paths in London many, many moons ago when we were young, and less grey, and probably had more hair in your case.
A little bit more hair, yeah, thanks.
Yes, indeed. Please tell our audience a little bit about the journey that led you into legal tech.
Yeah, an interesting one. I was actually doing CRM in the motor industry at a university. I did a business systems degree at uni in the UK. Got myself into a CRM job. My best friend's dad was the CEO of what was then Cowies. I think it's now called Arriva. They do a lot of bus and vehicle in the UK. So got stuck in with that. A girlfriend at the time moved down to London ahead of me and I was going to follow. That didn't work out. So we decided that I was just going to come down to London and try my chance. So looked around for a job. One came up at Nabarro's, of all places, law firm in London. My dad is a retired sole practitioner. So there's always been an interest in the law in my family. I never wanted to be a lawyer, but I figured a marketing job in a law firm in London sounded like a great place to start. So I made the move on my own back in 97, I think it was. It was just around the time that Diana died. So it's very much that month when I came down to London. The whole of London was covered in flowers and there was a very interesting feeling in the city at that point. So yeah, so I started out in a law firm doing marketing, really. That's where it all began.
Amazing. And looking back now, how would you say the legal industry has changed since those early Elite days?
Oh, I think back in the day, it was still very much the senior partners lunch club, I think I'd like to call it. I remember Nabarro's was based in Mayfair at the time. Their offices before they moved to Holborn. And there was a few nice restaurants nearby. I think Langham's was across the street. It was quite common for the partners and the marketing director to take us out for lunch to have a chat. I think I had one of my first sort of interview style meetings at one of those restaurants. So it was very much almost like a boys' club in some ways. It was very much about networking, relationships. I mean, in some ways it hasn't changed, but I don't think clients necessarily want to be wined and dined quite as much as they were back then. That was very much how you did business. You took someone to lunch, you took them to an event or out to dinner, you invited them to a seminar. You really had these sort of on-site events because we didn't really have the technology that we have now for online meetings and that type of thing. I mean, you and I are now talking across the other side of the world from each other. So it's a very different way of doing business. So I think that has certainly changed. I think the old school, well, still there a little bit. I think it's moved on.
Yes, indeed. It's definitely a different world that we live in. So, and obviously you worked in different roles, from support to implementation to sales, and now obviously on the consulting side. Which role would you say shaped your perspective the most and why?
Interesting question. I think the role that shaped me the best is probably the sales role. When I left Nabarro's, I went to Elite, and I spent best part of 20 years working at Elite, and I did roles in support, consulting, implementation, and sales. And I think whilst in my earlier career with Elite, the consulting and the support were great from a product point of view and understanding and getting one-on-one time with clients. But the sales really gave me a bit of an opener to the rest of the legal industry. I guess talking to other legal tech vendors, understanding the full legal tech landscape a little bit further, and just getting me a little bit more out of my comfort zone, I think, if anything.
Yeah, no, amazing. That's really, really good to hear. So then you've now gone on to Blind Spots and you've written a book called Beyond the Features. Tell us a little bit about the reasons why you felt compelled to write this book.
I had a bit of time on my hands. Technology had evolved. I think after close to 3 decades in the legal tech industry, and particularly in my sales side and in the implementation side, I've seen my fair share of legal tech projects that kind of start with enthusiasm, tend to fizzle. A lot of the mistakes that firms make, whether it's to do with poor planning upfront, really not a clear path of what it is they're actually trying to achieve, and certainly in a lot of cases, very little plan for, I guess, adoption and how it's going to maintain itself going forward. So when I had some time on my hands, when I left Elite into last year, I just decided to put, well, it wasn't really pen to paper, it was more notepads on my Mac to ChatGPT to help me out a little bit to structure things. Again, some of the tools that are available now really enable me to create the book, which I couldn't have done before. It's maybe something you want to dig into a little bit further, but I'm actually visually impaired. So being able to sit and read and write a book and go back through it and edit it without some of the modern technology is almost impossible. So I just decided I wanted to get something out there that put my 3 decades of experience down onto paper, and use it more, I guess, as a marketing tool, a bit of a leveler for myself, just to have something out there, something I can promote and use it to, I guess, as a starting point for conversations and talking to you about it right now. Didn't think I was going to sell hundreds of thousands of copies. Be nice, but it's certainly been an interesting journey and one I've thoroughly enjoyed doing.
Yeah, no, indeed. We'll definitely, I definitely want to talk a little bit more about the visually impaired part of your some of the challenges that you face there, but we'll get to that in a moment. But in terms of going back to the book, one of the things that I see again and again, particularly with some of the small and mid-sized law firms that are going through like a technology selection, is they tend to look for like a like-for-like replacement of a solution. Yeah. I'm interested to get your thoughts on that in terms of like, what, do you think that that's a risky way of kind of selection, and how would you advise firms in that scenario?
100%. I think sometimes when I've worked with firms, they've got a system that's probably 15, 20 years old. And the only reason they're really looking to replace it is because it's end of life, or the vendors just stop supporting it. So they're wanting to move to something new, and they know they have to. I find this particularly in, I guess, the mid-tier. And I guess mid-tier depends on where you are in the world, because here in Australia, mid-tier is probably 50 to 150 fee earners. In the US, it's probably 300 or 400 fee earners. So it differs. But here in Australia, where I'm doing most of my work, it is really those firms that, I guess, they don't know what they don't know, if that makes sense. They have come from something they've been using for 10 or 15 years. They know they need to move forward. And they just really want some comfort. They want to make sure that they can do the same things they did before. And part of my journey, I was doing a lot of work in the early days with Elite in the CRM space, and found it quite common that firms would want to migrate every single piece of data they had in their CRM system into the new CRM system, whether that be like a little industry code they'd been collecting, or particular, I don't know, dietary requirements for one of the contacts for events. But you'd find that there might be 6 or 7 records with that field attached to it, and they insisted on creating new spaces in the new system to put all that information. And it was quite difficult to explain to these firms that coding one field takes the same amount of time whether there's 6 pieces of data in it or 600,000 pieces. So it just didn't make sense to me that people were trying to just shoehorn the same data into a new system and end up falling into old habits. So it's very much something that I've always pushed over the last sort of 20 years during my time at Elite, was that leave stuff behind. Do you really need to bring everything with you? Of course, you've got to bring what you need to have from day one. And I think that has certainly become much easier in today's technology landscape, because you can very easily leave behind data and keep it available in a data warehouse, just an external database that you can query very easily. So I think that whole sort of aspect has changed quite significantly.
Yeah, no, I can totally relate to that. And I think there's also an aspect of data cleanliness and integrity, right? In terms of that legacy data. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of time rectifying that so that it makes sense in the new system.
Yeah, for sure.
So are there other common mistakes that you're seeing firms make when they're going through that selection process of a new technology solution?
Yeah, I guess probably two major ones, and one of them really is the title of the book, Beyond the Features. I find that a lot of the times, especially in my sales career, being on the receiving end of RFPs, the traditional RFP that comes across your desk and it's got a spreadsheet attached to it with 600 or 700 rows, asking whether your finance system allows you to create a matter or a client, the sorts of questions you don't really need to be asking when you're looking at a vendor that does a finance system. So there's a lot of, I guess, emphasis on the features and making sure that the software that the firms are selecting does everything it can and all these extra things that it needs to do. And I just think people get stuck in that and they don't really focus on what is really important, which is the vendor that I'm looking at able to support me? Are we going to have a relationship going forward? What is the roadmap that vendor's got for the solution? Other things like just the feature set that you need to be looking at. There's a whole other suite of tools, things like integrations, the ability to get the new system to work cohesively with existing tech stack. Quite often people overlook that. I've worked with a couple of firms over the years where they've had Salesforce for their CRM, they've gone with Adorant for their finances, they picked something else for their case management, they've got something else for research, and then at the end of the day, someone says, well, can we get a report across those systems? And nobody had an idea how to talk to each of the systems. Again, that has become so much easier now with modern technology. But I think that feature trap, I tend to call it the feature illusion, actually, is something that people get caught up in. A story I was talking to was a CEO of a legal tech vendor, a bit of a startup. He's in the enterprise relationship management space, so the who knows who type of solution. And we were talking a couple of months ago about RFPs, and he just said that he refuses to do them. He finds that it gives him a disadvantage when he's presented with an RFP. When I asked him why, he explained quite bluntly that his solution does 10 things really well. One of his competitors may do 100 things. So on paper, when it's a checkbox exercise, the firm looking for the software thinks that the solution with 10 features isn't doing too much. But he's found that when people who have bought this solution with 100 features, you go back and talk to them in 6 months' time and ask them what they're using with it, it turns out they're only using 10 features, which happens to be the features that his solution was doing really well. So I think a lot of the time you end up bloating what you've purchased because you've got features that you don't need, and you've then got to support them and consider them in future upgrades and that sort of thing. So I think you can over-focus on the features. And that's certainly one of the biggest hurdles I see with firms selecting legal tech.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And if you, so from your book perspective, if there was one lesson that you would want readers and law firm leaders to take away from it, what is it?
Don't send legal tech vendors 600-row spreadsheets of feature recommendations. So, would be one thing. Because when the tech vendors themselves don't end up actually giving you a good response, they're spending their time ticking the boxes and filling in the spreadsheet. So really, you need to... I always think the consultative selling approach is a much better way of doing things. talk to the vendors if you're a law firm directly. By all means, have an external consultant involved, but make sure you as the firm have a direct channel of communication with the legal tech vendor, because they're more than happy to help. They want to understand the problems that you're having with your current systems, and they will quite often happily go through scenarios to show you how their solution will fix that problem that you're having. I find that if you just get stuck in this feature checklist, you just end up comparing systems based on what features they've got and not really understanding whether long term the solution is the right fit for your firm.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess from a measuring of ROI perspective, going from a kind of problem solving kind of mindset to say like these are the challenges that I want to solve with a product solution, helps perhaps with defining metrics to be able to say, okay, now over time, how does that product actually fit the firm, and what did it actually solve the problem, right? By tracking some of those metrics.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when you're looking at solution selection, that is really just one small part of the entire legal tech transformation journey. I think it starts way before actually thinking about what software vendors you're going to talk to. You need to understand what's working well in the firm, what's not working well. And the same things that are working well for one group of people may not be the same things that are working well for another group. So you really need to make sure you're talking to the lawyers, the accountants, the support staff, all the different areas of the business that are using the same piece of software, and finding out exactly what it is that they're struggling with. Quite often, people don't raise a problem when there's a problem. They just find a way around it and carry on. So really digging deep into finding out what is going on in the business is a great way to start before you even think about looking at new software.
Yep. And if there was a firm listening to us today and is kind of embarking on a journey to be able to replace one of their systems, maybe finance system, for example, what would you say is the right way to start? So where is the starting point, and what's the best way to start a selection process?
I think, again, going back to what I was just saying before, I think working out the real reason that you're wanting to do it. Why is it you're wanting to look at a new finance system, for example? Is it because the one you've got doesn't handle multi-currency? You've just merged with a business in a different country and you've got some more complex billing requirements. Really understanding why you need a new system. Is it a technology platform problem? Is it an old on-prem solution that's using ancient back-end technology that really is hard to update and it needs bespoke developers to keep it up and running? So definitely the place to start is with a legal tech assessment. And it's not just an assessment of the piece that you're trying to replace. It's really your entire stack. So how is that finance system fitting in with other tools that you're using in the business, whether it's your HR payroll system, your document management system, your document creation system, a lot of new e-billing tools that are in the market now. So what is it you need to have working well? What are your clients using and expecting you to use? And that you need to consider all of those things before you even start to think about the options that you have available to you. So again, the definite piece of advice here is to stop before you go too fast into looking at a new product. Quite often, I'll have received a phone call saying, our finance system is 20 years old, we need a new one. What can you do for me? And that's kind of the sales lead question that you get. And you've really then got to piece it together and sort of reverse engineer what it is they're actually saying to you. I definitely find that sometimes what firms say they want isn't necessarily what they actually need. There's a disconnect in what people are asking for versus what they actually need. I think getting to the bottom of that is crucial in making the whole project successful.
Yeah, no, great advice. So David, I want to switch gears a little bit here to talk a little bit more about your personal journey, if I may.
Sure.
And you kind of touched on this earlier about being visually impaired, so hopefully we can kind of dig into that a little bit more. But you've pretty much navigated your entire career with low vision. And you've done everything from traveling, presenting, working on site with clients. And that, to me, is like quite a demanding path that you led, and bearing in mind that obviously some of the technology that you've mentioned that you're using today and some of the advancements in helping people with low vision may not have been there when you started your career. What motivated you to pursue that path? With that in mind.
It's a really good question. I don't know what it was exactly, but I just decided. I was diagnosed with a rare form of macular degeneration when I was a teenager, and at the time it didn't really impact me. I knew that I struggled to read the blackboard at school, and reading text in a book, I had to take my time a little bit longer with it. So at the time, it wasn't really a problem, but I knew it was a degenerative condition. So over time, it gets worse and worse. I just decided that I really wanted to have, I guess, in air quotes, as normal a career as possible, and that I would make good use of technology that was available to me. And at the time, we're going back to the late 90s here, there wasn't a lot of it. One particular instance, I remember you helping me install some of it in a computer when we were at Elite. Some interesting conversations I'm sure we had as we tried to put Zoom text onto an old Windows laptop so I could magnify the screen. But I think it's taught me a few things about myself and about just to have trust in the technology. There's so much of it out there now. One of the things I definitely have noticed is that the technology right now is moving at much faster pace than my eyesight is deteriorating. So that perhaps wasn't the case 20, 30 years ago. I really didn't know where technology was going to go. But looking back, it's going faster than my eyesight's getting worse. So I do find now that there's no real obstacle, apart from the fact that I can't see faces or read name badges at a conference. That has its challenges, and I can't read signs and things like that, but there are tools out there. So I've just decided to embrace as normal a career as I can and deal with the challenges as I go.
Yeah, no, it's inspiring to listen to, and it's kind of interesting because I remember meeting you for one of the first times I think we met in our London office at the time, and us doing that installation of Zoom text, and actually thinking at the time that we were installing it on an operating system, Microsoft operating system, that actually didn't handle accessibility very well. Hence why you needed to use a third-party product to be able to see the screen properly, and basic magnification is really what it was. What have you seen in terms of like the operating system side evolving over the years, and is it better for visually impaired people?
100%. It is dramatically better. I mean, Zoom Text as a piece of software was, I guess, career saving for me at the time. It was an amazing piece of software for what it did. It's always been a screen magnification tool that doesn't distort as you magnify. Some inbuilt magnifiers in Windows still distort as you increase the size of the text that you're looking at, so it becomes quite difficult to look at. One example I remember, there was a version of Zoom Text that you could actually get on a USB stick, because half the problem was that you had to have it on every PC that you used. And if you're doing support and consulting and you're visiting law firms, having the ability to use the client's computer was a big challenge. On a number of occasions, I had to try and install my own version of software off a USB. And back in the day, that didn't go down too well with IT teams and security, plugging a USB stick into the drive of a client's computer. But on the grounds of accessibility and disability, I think it was sort of accepted and we got around it. But it did mean I had to plan ahead quite considerably when I did client visits. I would have to speak to the IT teams to make sure that they were prepared for me to install. I had to allow extra time before meetings. Certainly presenting slideshows and software demos was a challenge, because if I magnified my screen, what I was projecting it onto would also be magnified, which is great if you've had a few too many beers the night before and you need to be able to see from the back of the room. but it's not that great if you're feeling a little bit nauseous and you're trying to watch me scrolling around my screen at times 10 magnification. But to your question about sort of technology now and how it sort of fits, modern operating systems really are accessibility focused. I use Mac predominantly. Big fan of the Mac accessibility and the ecosystem they have. The tools for low vision that are built into the Mac OS, the iPad OS, the phone, the watch, they all work as one. So I'm familiar with one, it works on the other. And there's little things that help make life easier. Like now, I did a presentation at a conference last week in Australia, and even Microsoft PowerPoint, I hadn't even realized until I was preparing for this conference that when you go into presenter mode with an external display, PowerPoint doesn't magnify the external display. It just lets you magnify the speaker notes and everything that you have in front of you. So it meant that I could present, I could read my screen in front of me from my laptop, and the two monitors that were facing out to the audience were just presenting the slideshow. So technology now has allowed that type of thing to be much easier, and just the built-in accessibility now. I don't require external software. You can still get Zoom text. It is still better than, I think, the native Windows stuff, but from a Mac perspective, I feel like I don't need it now. I use mainstream tools with inbuilt accessibility all the time.
Hey John, how do I find out what we've invoiced my client?
How can I view my outstanding WIP?
How do I submit my expenses again?
Do we have next Monday off?
Monday off?
It's exciting to have fresh faces at your law firm, but onboarding them takes a lot of time and a lot of energy when everyone is remote. You're busy enough as it is. Helm 360 has the solution. Just ask Termi. Helm 360's next level chatbot solution for knowledge management. Termi can answer many of your new hires' questions for you without distracting you or anyone else at the firm. This means fewer frantic emails, fewer help desk tickets, more time and more focused productivity for everyone at the firm. Working with Termi, you can have those eager new employees up to speed in a snap. They may never need to ask you a question again. Check out helm360.com/Termi to see Termi in action and find out how it can make onboarding new hires as easy as sending an email.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I mean, it's great. It's kind of, again, inspiring to hear how some of the challenges that you faced are basically making you think differently about how you prepare. It sounds like you've kind of moved more emphasis onto like the preparation for an event or going to a client site so that you're kind of prepared for being able to deliver, which is really fantastic to hear. So how has your lived experience shaped the way that you now advise and consult with clients? Are there any parts of that kind of drip into the world of consulting?
Yeah, for sure. I think I've always, when I've been doing training, certainly in my time at Elite, when I was training on a newly implemented CRM solution or new case management tool, I would kind of learn the screens, would learn the solution behind the scenes, and I would know where things were. Back in the days of Elite Enterprise, it was so much easier because everything was in the same place all of the time. In the world of web and configurable screens, it becomes a little bit of a challenge now that people can put things wherever they want, and I have to remember that. I did once do a training presentation of, I think it was an Elite CRM tool, and I did it in French. I didn't realize it was in French, and I think I got 20 minutes into my presentation and somebody said, I didn't realize you could speak French. And I had no idea that I was doing it in French. It just so happened that I was remembering where everything was. So from a lived experience, I think I've tweaked the way I train people. I'm much more descriptive when I'm talking to people about when I'm describing a screen. I will tell them that you need to click the confirm button at the top right of the screen rather than just saying click the confirm button. There's little things like that just help direct people, whether you can see or not. I think it's helpful just to have that grounding perspective when you're talking about where things are on the screen. Also, just little bits and pieces just from day to day. And it's one of the things I'm starting to venture into with my own consulting is to raise awareness of accessibility and accommodation needs that people have, not just for low vision, but for all kinds of disability, whether it's hard of hearing, whether it's mobility, neurodivergence, and just using my lived experiences just to I guess, raise awareness and show that there are tools out there to help people do what they need to do. Over my time with Elite, I've had a number of clients where there's been a blind lawyer or some blind employee at a law firm. I've seemed to be the person that has been referred to go and have a chat with them and just advise them how they can use the software and the tools that are available. So I've kind of, adapted my own lived experience to try and help others. And I think that's something I really want to do a lot more of going forward.
Yeah, so with the kind of theme of accessibility in the workspace, I think it's fair to say that it often gets sidelined, right, as one of the inclusion efforts, particularly when you compare it to some of the other areas around gender or race. Why do you think it doesn't get as much attention?
I think it's just public voice and public opinion and trends. I mean, don't want to get this into a political sort of conversation, but again, one of the things I have noticed, a lot of when you talk about diversity, equality, and inclusion, it does seem to sort of base itself around gender, sexuality, and race. For some reason, I don't know why it is, but disability, I think it's just they don't have the loudest voice. A statistic I was looking at recently when I was preparing for this presentation, I think it's like 70% of people with a disability don't actually tell their employer that they have the challenge. I think because they've had some past bad experience, or they just know that it's going to be difficult to get the credibility and the help they need, so people just avoid it. Whereas I guess the sexuality, the gender thing at the moment is very topical. It's very much in the media. It's very much out there. From my perspective, if you install a gender-neutral toilet in your workplace, I'm not going to be able to read the sign. So that in itself has a challenge, which is different for me. So I think it's about the voice, the media at the time. And I know that businesses, they know that they need to be accessible. And the true definition of accessibility is making environments, platforms, and processes available and accessible for every single person. It's not just about disability, but it seems to be, if you think of the word accessibility, people think wheelchairs or braille buttons on the lifts or screen magnification, but it's a lot more than that. It's about making the reception area in your law firm accessible for an elderly person who can't get down onto the very trendy, expensive leather low chairs that you've got lining your reception area. So it's that type of stuff. It's not just about wheelchairs and ramps. It's about a lot more. And as I said, I think it's just what's topical and the voice that sort of community has. So I think there's a lot to be done to improve it.
Yeah, indeed, I agree. And I think I've seen you write or talk about some the kind of key areas of accessibility being physical, digital, procedural, and cultural. And I think you touched on some of the physical things that can be done. Help us understand some of the other aspects that you kind of refer to and what that means in practice.
Yeah, sure. I call those the 4 pillars of accessibility and sort of what I think about. So the physical we've kind of talked about. That's the obvious stuff that most people think about. It's the ramps, it's the automated doors to get into a building, it's the rails in the bathroom, the accessible toilets, those sorts of things. But when you talk about the digital accessibility, that's really about how you're accessing the web. There is the WCAG2 standards, which is like a worldwide consortium for accessibility guidelines. I think that's what it stands for. I'm not entirely sure now that I said that out loud. But there are guidelines out there that companies are supposed to follow to make sure that websites are accessible. And by that, it's about having good contrast in the text and the colors that are used, having the right size fonts, having alternative text available on all images, those sorts of things. And there's a huge percentage of websites that fail on many aspects of accessibility when it comes to that digital side of things. And I think that's something that can certainly be improved. I mean, if you think about it from a law firm perspective, your firm's website is your shop front. So if you've got people looking at your website, and when you get to the homepage, you've got some fancy scrolling movie, and you've got to try and work out where the sort of pop-up menu appears and how to navigate around it. If you're visually challenged, you're going to back away from that. And I think actually there was a stat from 2019 about UK and retail, and it was something crazy like £19 billion of lost sale opportunity because people who couldn't access websites backed out of the purchase experience. I mean, we're talking about retail here, but there's a lot of lost opportunity, and that's got to be the same for professional services, you'd have to think. If you're looking and comparing law firms, if you can't access the information you need, you're going to go to the one down the road that you can access. So it has a lot of impact on your ability to get business and offer a really inclusive experience for your clients.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And at Blindspot, you're now building some practical tools, I understand, to help with awareness. So I believe it's the Accessibility Awareness Toolkit, and that you run workshops. Tell us a little bit about what gaps these are designed to fill.
It is basic awareness. I'm not trying to replace an accessibility audit for a business, but what I'm trying to offer is a lived experience, almost a walkthrough type experience. So I put together a toolkit which really, I've got about 9 documents in my toolkit at the moment, and it covers things like common barriers to accessibility. It covers the 4 pillars of accessibility, the different types of accommodations that people need. And just making people aware that it's not just wheelchairs, blind people, deaf people, and I guess the new category of neurodivergence is the new category that everyone's talking about. I think every Gen Z person these days is somewhere on the spectrum, so they tell you. So I think we're all on the spectrum somewhere. But being aware of those things, and by that it's just like someone who's neurodivergent may not be able to understand a complex contract. So it's having things in plain English, or having quiet spaces for people who can't concentrate because they've got sort of like some of the neurodivergent conditions. So it's all those sorts of things. I'm just trying to raise awareness. And one of the pillars, coming back to your question before, which didn't really finish off on the other 2 pillars, but the cultural sort of accessibility pillar is probably one of the most important ones. I think from my experiences of visiting firms, it's the little pieces that, whilst they're small bits of friction along the way, individually they don't mean much, but together they add up and create a frustration for the people that need the help. And if your team isn't aware, particularly your client-facing team, like your receptionists, the people who are hosting events for the law firm, the lawyers that are meeting with the clients, if they're not aware that some people do need these accommodations, that whole cultural aspect, it just falls short. So what I'm trying to do is create a fun sort of half-day workshop where I go through some of the basics of accessibility, making people understand that it's not just about the obvious, it's really related to everybody, and try and have some sort of interactive, fun, engaging sort of discussions with firms and help them understand it a little bit better. And again, offering separately a walkthrough where I will visit their office, go to have a meeting, and as I go through, I will sort of document the experiences that I've had, whether that's sort of finding my way to the floor for their building, in their building for the meeting, getting to the reception, handling, getting to the meeting room, connecting to the Wi-Fi, connecting to the tech, finding the kitchen facilities, all those sorts of things, and just talking through with the sort of operations team at the firm about the experiences that I'm having from my lived experience and how they could perhaps think about improving that for others.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You made a really interesting point earlier, which kind of answers the question that I was going to ask you, which was around the fact that many organizations still view accessibility as like a compliance exercise, right? Like it is a tick box exercise to be able to do what you need to do to kind of meet the need. And what I was going to ask you is how do you reframe that to highlight the business benefits? And you kind of gave a really good example of the website, right? Leading to somebody either coming to your law firm for a service versus not, if it's not designed in the right way that they can actually access the information on it. Are there other aspects to that beyond the kind of pure business monetary value, which I think you quite clearly articulated? Are there other areas like the kind on the human level that are also benefits to firms in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of things get missed when you talk about retention, staff retention, and recruitment and client engagement. So again, probably a personal experience, which probably sort of highlights this process. Probably about 15 years ago, I was applying for a job here in Australia. It was not like a high-flying job of any kind, but they wanted me to do psychometric testing. And at the time, I hadn't disclosed on my application that I was visually impaired, but I didn't want to use, as much as people aren't supposed to discriminate, there's always that thing in the back of my mind that they're going to. So I had to sit this psychometric test, and it was an online test, which I could do it from home. It was a timed test, and lots of questions around, like if a train is going at 200 miles an hour between point A and point B, at what point does it get to this point in the middle? And it's all those types of brain-teasing questions. And one of them was a picture of 6 cows, and they all had different black and white patterns on them. I had to find the one that was different. That type of thing is impossible for me, and it has no impact on my ability to do a job. In that particular instance, I had my wife sitting alongside me, so I did technically cheat, and she was sort of helping me pick the right answers just so I could get through this test. But I think that just demonstrates that, again, we're going back 15 years ago here, that was not an accessible recruitment process. You are leaving people on the table that they just can't get through that type of onboarding process. So you're missing out on a lot of talent. And there's people that you have in your environment as well. If you're not providing quiet meeting spaces, I mean, pre-COVID, there was a whole movement to open plan hot desk environments with these sort of warehouse-style buildings with exposed air conditioning and cabling, the type. But they're terrible for acoustics and for people who are neurodivergent and need that concentration space. So if you're creating environments, you need to have spaces that aren't just for your senior partners to have their office in the corner. You need to have places for everybody. So I think there's a lot the benefits of accessibility go way beyond ticking a box. Again, I don't keep running out these stats, but there's one thing I published on my LinkedIn today about, I think it was like $5,000 is the average saving per employee by having an accessible, inclusive environment, because you're not paying for the churn and for the lack of productivity that comes with inaccessible environments.
Yeah, no, really good point. So if a firm wanted to take a meaningful step tomorrow, what would be your recommendation as their starting point?
In terms of accessibility?
Yes.
Yeah, the starting point would be to pick up the phone and talk to me. I mean, one of the things I do for my website is I offer just a free 30-minute consultation. I don't want to do everything for free, of course, but happy to talk to firms about what their accessibility policies are today. Quite often firms will, as I said, they know they have to do them. They know they have to make their environments inclusive. So it's a case of just having that initial conversation. Send me an email, pick up the phone, we can have a chat, and we can see if me walking through their business makes sense for them to do that, or even running a workshop. So I'm happy to do the workshops remotely, but I think if I run a workshop with a firm after I've done like an on-site walkthrough, I can tailor that workshop to the exact things that I've found along the way that can be improved. Many of the things that you can improve on when it comes to accessibility can be done instantly and don't cost a lot of money. Obviously, if you have to widen your doorways, it's going to be a bit of an expensive exercise. But if you're doing an office refit, like a lot of people do these days, if you just budget in some money for accessibility accommodations, it is a small percentage of the refit to make those things done at that time. It's not a requirement that you do everything tomorrow. if you can just do one or two things every day. It might be as simple as making the Wi-Fi password in your client meeting room a little bit more readable, or having the ability for your receptionist to be aware that if someone is of low vision, to help them with the Wi-Fi password. It doesn't cost anything to do those things. So it's just little things, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get out there. But the starting point, just reach out. Happy to talk to anybody about these types of topics.
Thank you. That's really good advice, and I love the actually like thinking about it. And you've educated me today. There's so many small things that could just be tweaked very easily to make a big difference for certain individuals. So yeah, really
yeah.
good,
And as I said, I call those little things. They're just minor frictions. And to you, if you see me struggling with the Wi-Fi password, that's just one part that you see me doing, and you'll probably brush past that. But in my experience, that's just one component of maybe a dozen things that have led up to me getting to the meeting room in the first place, that then have me arriving in that meeting a little bit more agitated than I perhaps need to be, a little bit stressed about connecting my laptop to do my presentation. There's a lot of examples like that where just tiny little things on their own mean nothing, but they snowball when they're all added together. So it's just addressing some of those little things are really easy to do, and they don't cost anything to do it.
Yep, absolutely. So I just want to move to some wrap-up questions now. So obviously with almost 30 years in the legal tech industry behind you, what do you think is the biggest blind spot, no pun intended, that firms have when it comes to legal technology adoption?
I think the lack of considering adoption is a big, big problem. I think firms, even the firms that do the planning and they decide that they know where their problems are, and they consider the software carefully and they evaluate it and they get a consultant in to help them, and then they implement the solution, and then they have a big party, go live party, once they put in their new finance system, and then that's it. I think one of the biggest problems I see is not having a continuous improvement program. Change is an ongoing process. There's no point putting in a new system if you're not training the people, if you're not connecting with them, certainly in the first 6 months, every month. Beyond that, every couple of months. Then after the first year, every quarter. And just reviewing what's working and what's working well, what's not working too well. And I think one of the biggest pieces of advice with implementing any piece of legal tech, don't overcomplicate it. Take the solution at its base value first, bed it in, get it doing what it was designed to do, and then evaluate after at least 6 months if what you've done actually meets purpose, or if there are actually some areas that you need to improve. And it would be really nice if we had a workflow here that helped with this, because we've found that it's not quite as efficient as we wanted it to be. I've come across so many firms over the years that have insisted that they have hundreds of customizations from go live, and the legal vendor has or hasn't pushed back, perhaps not hard enough sometimes, and lets the client to call the shots. I think there needs to be a little bit of firmness from a lot of legal tech vendors to push back on some of those customizations and convince people that they need to just use the system as it was intended and then evolve from there. I think that will make for much better adoption for most legal tech projects. And you'll probably find after 6 months that the things you thought you wanted from day one, you don't actually need anymore, because the new system does things more efficiently anyway than what you were doing previously.
Yep, really good advice. Really good advice. The next question is, if you could go back to yourself using Doctor Who's time machine to age 18, what advice would you give David?
I would tell him to take a few more risks, not be so cautious, and not as timid about approaching my career. I know we've talked about me wanting to embrace as normal career as possible, but I think knowing where the technology's got to, and we've managed to get through this entire podcast without really talking about AI, which is incredible in this current age, but just the tools that are available now, is not to worry about the technology. The technology will be there to help. do whatever I needed to do. And I think another piece of advice I would give myself would be just to enjoy the ride and go with it, and just be open to a lot more new ideas than perhaps I was 20, 30 years ago.
Very good. Good advice. And finally, what's keeping you inspired right now outside of the legal world?
Oh, a few things, really. I think the accessibility side of things is really keeping me focused at the moment. It was always something I figured I would do later once my legal tech consultancy business kind of got up and running. But I just see this need outside the legal industry. I've got a few stories. I think I shared one on LinkedIn a few weeks ago about a hotel experience. I mean, the hospitality industry is ripe for being fixed. There's so many issues and challenges, and I think this whole topic of accessibility has just become a passion of mine, really. So I just love being involved in that type of thing. Other than that, I'm quite keen on. I've joined a dad's dance crew, which you've probably told you about before. So my daughter is at a dance studio, and a few of the dads about 5 years ago in 2020, when COVID started, we decided that this can't be too hard. We'll give that a go. So we decided that we'd form ourselves a dance crew. We put on a concert at the end of 2020 for our families, and the owner of the studio decided that this was fantastic and started to put us into competitions the following year. So we've since won several trophies, but it's a little bit of a complete side thing, nothing to do with legal tech or anything. It's just bizarre extracurricular activity, if you like.
So we may be seeing you on Australia's Got Talent at some point?
Unlikely.
Well, it sounds like an amazing thing to do, to kind of like take your mind off the stuff that's the day to day, and it sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, indeed. Good. Well, David, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for taking time out to speak to me.
No problem at all. It's been a pleasure, Bim. I know, like I said, we've known each other for over 20 years now, so it's great to have this conversation. Our paths have crossed again. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Legal Helm. Thank you as always for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps us out.